Everyone, I'm Katie Tam. I'm one of the health coaches at Logansport Memorial Hospital. I'm going to go over motivation today and get more into the ins and outs of making changes. We'll talk about what motivation is, what drives it, why we might lack it, some of those signs of a lack of motivation, and then at the end, we'll talk more about some ways to increase it or just help with finding that motivation. I'm sure most of you understand what motivation is, but it's nice sometimes just to have it up there. It just describes why a person does something. It's your driving force, it's that process that initiates, guides, and maintains goal oriented behaviors. You are working towards what's important to you. And to briefly touch on the different types of motivation, there's two main ones here, extrinsic versus intrinsic. So that extrinsic one is just it's coming from an external goal. So usually it's some type of thing like money, competition, an award. In terms of like wellness, a lot of times you're going to hear people talking about like, oh, we get an insurance discount, or we get money for participating, or we get a premium reduction. So that, compared to that intrinsic, which is ultimately what we're trying to move you towards with some of these behavior change um, things are, you're doing it for its own sake. You are interested in it, it's engaging, or maybe it's challenging to you and you like that challenge. It's something you enjoy, it's something that brings satisfaction or happiness. So ultimately, our goal is to move you to that intrinsic motivation versus always having to put something there to get you motivated to do it. When it comes to what influences our motivation, there's no simple explanation why some people engage in healthy behaviors and others don't. And additionally, just because someone's engaging in one healthy behavior doesn't mean that they'll engage in another. But what we do know, there are some predictors here, a few determinants of that behavior, such as learning, social, individual factors, emotions. I'm going to briefly go over these, and then we'll talk later on in the presentation about just different tips or maybe ideas on how to apply some of these things. But the first one here is operant conditioning, and basically this is just it examines the learning process by looking at relationships between events or situations that precede a behavior, then the actual behavior, and then the consequences of that behavior. One of the more important components of operant conditioning is what happens after a behavior is executed. So there's different types of consequences that lead to different behavioral outcomes. And that's going to look like positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, punishment, things like that. And again, I'm going to get into that a little bit more in the tips section on how that can be applied when you're trying to make a healthy lifestyle change. The next one is our habits. Most behaviors are habits, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. So that's why a lot of times when I'm coaching, especially I have people come in that have been doing maybe something that they deem as unhealthy for years. They're not going to be able to just stop it because it's become a bad habit at this point. So these definitely play a role in how it influences, our changing and our motivation. The third one there is social support. So having different types of support in our life definitely help with motivation. Whether we have it or a lack of it plays a huge role, especially spouse support. But there are different types of support here. So emotional, so having somebody in your life that can express empathy, concern, acceptance, encouragement. The main thing is here is feeling valued. Another type would be tangible, so like educational services or direct methods of assistance. Then we have an informational, so this would be like a problem solving support, so such as giving advice, guidance, suggestions. And then the last one is companionship, so having that sense of belonging or feeling comfortable, so having like a accountability partner or motivation buddy. The next one is just our personality traits. I'm not going to get into this too much, but our personality traits, they're general tendencies that people have in their personality or psychological makeup. There are two though that I wanted to hit on that have been shown to help with changing lifestyle behaviors. Self-motivation, so that is it's reflective of one's ability to set goals, monitor progress, and self-reinforce. And the other one is conscientiousness, and that's an individual's tendency to be organized and dutiful. So both of those have been linked to higher like fitness levels, healthy food selection, and they tend to be more aware of expectations when it comes to changing behavior, and they will work more on a regular basis to meet the demands of that change. They may be more prepared to fully adopt any type of like modification in their life. Then the last one here is cognitive factors. So it is really important that we understand how our internal thoughts affect our behavior because it can lead to unrealistic expectations or an unrealistic assessment regarding our need to change if we don't understand that. And, our beliefs can and do determine how we feel, how we behave. And oftentimes we think that maybe it's just a situation that happens or an event that happens that determines how we act and behave. Some of the key things that fall under cognitive factors are health perception, and that's just our knowledge, attitude, belief, maybe assessment of our overall health. So, for example, if somebody has a poor perception of their health, they're very unlikely to start or change any behavior. And even if they do, they're probably going to have issues adhering to it, or they're going to do it at such a low intensity or frequency. The next one is self efficacy. And this is the belief in one's capabilities to complete a task or achieve a goal. This is related to whether or not somebody will participate in an activity, and then a person's participation in an activity can actually influence your self efficacy level. So it's a circular relationship there. The other one is locus of control. So that's belief and control over our health outcomes. And then the last one there is perceived barriers. So, and not to say that you don't have barriers in your life. We absolutely all have challenges and obstacles that we need to overcome to make some of these changes in our life. But sometimes we have a tendency to maybe make a mountain out of a molehill on some of these, or we just really, really, really see them as unmoving, and we have a hard time problem solving that. So to wrap that last section up there, it is just again, our internal thoughts can most certainly affect our behavior and our ability and our confidence in making a lifestyle change effectively. So why do we lack motivation? And then some signs of not having any. So these are probably ones that you guys are like, yes, absolutely. Stress, burnout, they're so draining. Chronic stress, I should say. You're just mentally exhausted. There's just nothing left to give. You just don't care about anything anymore, especially if you're experiencing that burnout. So no surprise there, you're going to lack motivation. Lack of confidence. So this goes back to that self-efficacy. So if you have low self-efficacy or low confidence, you just don't believe in yourself. You don't feel like you're capable of doing things. So absolutely, you're not gonna have a ton of motivation to want to do things if you feel like you're gonna fail. Unclear values, goals, purpose. This could probably go in with the boredom because sometimes when that's happening, maybe procrastination comes into play because we're just doing things because we have to or we feel obligated, or if we're not lining up with what we're passionate about, we kind of just, we just don't care. If our goals are unclear, that can just be, we don't have enough direction. And that can muddy the waters a little bit when something's really vague. We just don't have a clear direction. A negative outlook. So we all know how negativity and a bad attitude can play into things, and it never really works out for us in the long run with that. A chaotic environment. So if you just have, little fires going on everywhere, it's really hard to put any type of energy or motivation into something else that's important if you have to be continually putting out environments putting out fires in your environment. And we'll get more into that later. We talked about support systems on the last slide. So poor support systems can absolutely drain you. They can take away from a lot of positive things going on in your life. And then mental health. Low motivation is a sign of other types of mental health like depression, anxiety. And this is something that I want to say, though, depression, anxiety, grief, burnout, those things may need something extra. This is something where these tips might help you, but absolutely, if you need to go to a different source, like go see a therapist, anything like that, that might be more appropriate in that situation. And then just signs of lack of motivation here, difficulty getting started on tasks or projects, or maybe you're procrastinating. There's that lack of energy, enthusiasm. Maybe you're just not interested in activities that you did before. You're negative. There's a lot of self doubt. Maybe you are coming to work later and leaving early, or just not coming at all. Um, so these are all things that maybe we've experienced before, but when they're happening continuously, then that's something that we definitely want to take a look at. We've gone over, motivation, what drives motivation, why we lack it, signs of those. So let's get into the tips to increase motivation. Here are the main ones that we're going to go over. I've got a slide for each one. Challenging irrational thoughts. We're going to talk about understanding our values, increasing our confidence, changing up our environment, having some accountability, some mindfulness, setting goals, and then getting support and practicing healthy habits. This slide gets more into the cognitive factors that we talked about a few slides back, and how our internal thoughts absolutely affect behavior. Whereas I said sometimes we think that a situation or event happens and then we have a behavior based off of that. Whereas it's more like a situation or event happens, we have thoughts and an internal dialogue about it, and then that kind of produces the behavior. So a lot of these distortions or like this irrational thinking, you probably have experienced at one point or another. So we have all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, mental filters, disqualifying the positive, jumping to conclusions, magnification or minimization, emotional reasoning, should statements, labeling and mislabeling, and personalization. When we have these irrational thoughts, it definitely increases the likelihood that we will not be successful at changing a behavior. And the main thing is challenging those. And we'll get into that a little bit more in the next few slides. But I mean, I will say when I'm coaching with people, I do see a lot of these, especially when we're talking about just like overcoming obstacles or challenges. But I mean, more often than not, I'm seeing a lot of these things happening, especially all or nothing thinking. That's one that I'm seeing over and over and over. But definitely want to start, if you're looking through these and you're like, oh yeah, man, I definitely do that, or I definitely default to that, then, this is a great time for you to kind of think through some of the things that you could do to challenge those thoughts. And this is just a very quick example. I've never had success in the past with losing weight, and I'll never have success in the future. I feel like a failure when it comes to weight loss. I can't stand to feel like a failure. It's intolerable for me. So there's quite a few irrational thoughts in there, jumping to conclusions. So your fortune telling, the mind reading, the labeling, where, you're just based on a limited exposure, based on your one personal, I guess it shouldn't be one personal, but you've tried to lose weight in the past and for you it's just never worked. The overgeneralization, the like just assuming that bad events are going to happen or that things always go a certain way for you, the emotional reasoning, you're basing your thoughts on feelings, the all or nothing thinking where you're just seeing things in absolute, There's magnification happening there, where you're magnifying the errors in your life, and then the catastrophe statement is the should statement. So you're just, setting these requirements without really considering any consequences there. So these are just some questions to ask yourself, because before any change can really take place, we need to change our thinking. And we also just need to identify it, because you may have not known, I guess, if you saw that slide and you were looking at it, you're like, man, I did not realize that I was doing these things, or that I was falling back on this irrational thinking. So, recognizing when it's in the moment that it's happening, but there are some things you can do. Examine the evidence. Ask yourself, what are the facts? What do they actually show? You could test the thought out, find out if it's really valid, or the Socratic method, where you can ask yourself several questions that lead to any consistencies in those irrational thoughts. So, in that last example, they were talking about being a failure, and you could ask, when you say you are a failure, do you mean that you fail at something some of the time, or all things all of the time? So you could ask yourself some of these questions. And on this next slide, I'm going to give you lots of things to think about, but there's just additional things that you can ask yourself. What's the evidence for or against this thought? So that kind of goes back to the fact checking one. Um, this is a good one. What would I tell a friend in this same situation as opposed to what I tell myself? A lot of times we're a lot harder on ourselves than we are our friends. We're probably a lot more encouraging, a lot more empathetic towards our friends, and maybe a lot more prone to problem solve their situation versus ourselves, where we might just talk negatively. What's the worst that could realistically happen? How bad would that be? Is it really true that I must, should, ought to, have to? Are there any other responses besides blaming myself? Is there any conceivable way to look at this positively? Um, is thinking this way helping the situation, myself, others, or is it just making it worse? And how have I tolerated these situations in the past? So these are all good questions to ask. A lot of that irrational thinking, it just takes time, and some inflection on that to figure out. I should have said introspection on that, to come up with some different answers for yourself, and then recognizing that it's happening. The next one is understanding your values. So sometimes we do things that maybe just don't align with how we feel. And that's when we start to feel maybe anxiety about things, worry, just disconnected, the lack of motivation, the procrastination, the boredom. So when we can clearly define our values, we can start making decisions that support that life that we want to live, or those behaviors we want to change, and we can adopt a decision making process that is values based. So basically, again, just lots of questions to ask yourself. Evaluate your decisions, large and small. Ask yourself if they feel in alignment with what's really important to you, or what you really want to change. Um, if they don't align, then it's definitely worth, thinking about what you can change or do differently. Um, and once you figure those out, and there's different ways you can figure these out. I mean, you could literally type into Google like different values and see what is important to you. You can do something related to just like a values exercise. You could do something like a priority matrix, where you're figuring out what's important to do now, what's not urgent, things that you should probably not be doing. It's like a timetable matrix, or like a vision board. Anything that can help you just define those core values and rank your tasks and activities. You can visualize your desired outcomes, because once you get those nailed down, you can start doing something, even if it's small, that reflects your values. You're gonna begin to find more meaning, more purpose, and have more motivation towards getting to that type of life, or that lifestyle change that you want to happen. And not only that, when we have this decision making process based off of our true values, what's really important to us, when we do come to a difficult situation, or a challenge or an obstacle in our behavior change journey, then you can, go to that values, those values that you have, and make a decision based off of what you feel is important versus just doing what everyone thinks you should be doing or what you feel obligated to do. So just definitely, if you haven't in a long time, take some time, understand what your values truly are, or maybe evaluate if you haven't looked at them in a while, just to see if they truly are in alignment of what you feel is important to you. The next one is increasing certainty and confidence. So this goes back to that self-efficacy. These are just ways to improve that, improve your confidence, increase that. So the first one there is get out of your comfort zone. And it's for a good reason why we're always encouraged to get out of our comfort zone. It can be frustrating because it does involve a lot of trial and error, learning, but it can be really rewarding, and we typically can experience success. And when we start to have those successes, or we're learning and we're figuring out new things, that's what's going to increase our self-efficacy, which increases our confidence. Um, and even when we do fail, though, the nice thing about that, when we fail, we can bounce back, we can recover, and it just provides those opportunities to increase our resilience, which is also a good thing. And one of the most powerful predictors of self-efficacy is past performance. So when we are getting out of our comfort zone, or we're learning and mastering new skills, new behaviors, that is just like it's so good, and it does improve that. So um, and not only that, it's based on our personal experience rather than secondhand accounts. So it is, like I said, it's very powerful. And when we are increasing that self-efficacy, it's only going to increase our chances of making a behavior change. The next one there is finding sources of inspiration from people, podcasts, books who align with what you're trying to achieve, your values, your goals, your aspirations, other positive or encouraging stories. Um, when we're hearing those things, it can give us some inspiration. It can give us a sense of perspective. I know sometimes I get overwhelmed with like just my life and where I'm at in it in general, but when I'm seeing stories, or seeing people getting through similar situations than me, I can recognize in that, like, okay, I can do this too, or I can at least start the process and kind of go through that trial and error um, journey and get some stuff figured out. So it can be motivating and it can be inspirational in that sense. Set SMART goals is the next one. We're going to get into this later, so I'm not going to get too much into it. The main thing there is, though, those goals, where we're having those specific goals, it gives us direction. And when we're hitting these targets, or we're hitting these goals, it can increase confidence in the meantime. Looking at the bigger picture, so this, goes back to that trial and error, because when we get out of our comfort zone or we try new things, we are going to have losses. So this is where we have to keep that perspective in mind. It's okay. It's going to happen. So just remember what you're trying to achieve here. And then the last one is reframing obstacles. So again, we know we're going to hit challenges, obstacles, barriers, everything. That's just going to happen. We'd be silly to think that we wouldn't get off track. But the key here is to have a plan. So the first one there is an if-then plan. So if this happens, then what am I going to do? What actions? What am I going to do to get through that obstacle? The second one is thinking of obstacles as like a playful test, and how you might overcome them. Um, if this happens, then here are some ideas that I have for that. So it's very similar to the if then plan. And then the last one is reflecting on times where you were successfully overcoming an obstacle in the past. So that kind of goes back to that self efficacy, because it is, our past performance is a very strong predictor of self efficacy. So if we can think about times that we were successful, it's going to increase our self efficacy, and it's going to increase our likelihood of adhering to like a behavior change of some sort. So anytime that we can think of what went well for us in the past, and what we did, that's gonna be helpful. The next section is about our environment, and a lot of this information is going to come from like James Clear, who wrote the book Atomic Habits. and he has a lot of great ideas and just insights onto how our environment plays into behavior change and motivation. So this comes from his book. It can be tempting to blame failure on a lack of willpower or a scarcity of talent and attribute success to hard work, effort, and grit. To be sure, those things matter. What is interesting, however, is that if you examine how human behavior has been shaped over time, you discover that motivation and even talent is often overvalued. In many cases, the environment matters more. So he goes on to talk about how we are quick to blame our environment when things go poorly. Like if we lose a job, it's because the economy sucks. If we lose a game, it's because the officiating was bad. If you're late to work, it's because traffic was insane. When we win, we tend to ignore the environment completely. If you land a job, it's because you were talented and likable. If you win a game, it's because you played better. If you're early for a meeting, it's because you're organized and prompt. And the point again, it's important to remember that in our environment drives behaviors, good or bad. And people who tend to have good environments tend to stick with good habits because they make those good habits easier to do. They reduce the number of steps to do them. They make a cue for a good behavior a big part of their environment. It's by no, they are trying to make things that way. It's not just luck that they are adhering to certain behaviors. And the example that he talks about is just, consider how many different ways a smoker could be prompted to pull out a cigarette, whether it's driving in a car, seeing a friend, feeling stressed at work, and so on. So that same strategy can be employed for good habits. You sprinkling triggers throughout your day, your surroundings, that's going to increase the odds that you'll think about your habit throughout the day. And then just that will help make sure that the best choice is the most obvious choice or the easy choice. That making that better decision is easy. It's natural when the cues for the good habits are right there in front of you. And there's some examples, as far as he talks about the mindless eating. So if there's a cookie on the counter or like sweets on the counter, you're probably going to eat those. So if you get rid of them and replace them with fruit, you might choose those instead. Um, if you are working out, it could be something as simple as, or if you're struggling to work out or get to the gym, finding a gym that's on the way home or that's not completely out of the way. Um, having a gym bag packed ready to go in the morning. Um, sorry, things like that will again trigger you to do that good habit or that behavior that you're really wanting to do. The three things that he talks about are there on the left hand side. So automate good decisions. So I've hit on this quite a bit already, but whenever possible, design an environment that's going to make those good decisions for you. So, for example, buying smaller plates can help you lose weight because you're using a 10-inch plate versus like a 12-inch dinner plate. You can't fill it up as much. Um, some people use software to block social media sites, so that can help with overcoming procrastination. You're not having to use willpower to try to stay off your phone. The second one is getting in the flow, and you would use this where you can have your good habits to fit in with your normal day or flow in with your normal day. The example that's used here is if you want to practice a musical instrument, you could place it in the middle of your living room. You're more likely to go to the gym if it's literally on the way home, um, instead of it being the opposite direction of your commute. So, whenever possible, design those habits to fit into the flow of your current patterns. And then the third one is just subtract negative influences. So this kind of goes back to like that example where the cookie's on the counter. Same thing here. You could make it easier to avoid unhealthy foods by storing them in a different place in your house, putting healthy foods at eye level versus hidden in a drawer. Like I know sometimes I put my fruits and vegetables in the drawer. So I forget about them every once in a while. Whereas if I stored them maybe right in the, when you open them up in the fridge, right there, cut up, ready to go, I'm probably going to be more inclined to grab them out of my fridge versus just sticking them in a drawer and forgetting about them and they go bad. Like I said, I pulled most of this stuff from James Clear's book. So if you want to know more about that, that's definitely something you should look into a little bit more. The next one is creating some accountability for yourself. The first one there, surround yourself with supportive friends, family, and coworkers. So we've talked about how important this is, and I think most of us do understand um, how this can make or break some of our motivation in making our changes. And if we have positive influences in our life or supportive people in our life, it's going to be a lot easier to adhere to any changes that we try to make. Find someone that wants to hear about your goals, somebody you can share that progress with, and maybe they can provide other information to you, or someone, like a health coach. Sometimes you guys are working with us quarterly and you can talk to us about certain things. So that's a great way to create accountability in your life. The second one there is creating an effective reward system. So this goes back to that operant conditioning and how um, our consequences can lead, or our behavior can lead to certain consequences. So these two go hand in hand as far as like negative and positive reinforcement and punishment. So with the reward system, some things to consider is, um, are you more motivated by smaller, more frequent rewards, or a bigger reward once you complete something? You probably want to experiment with a couple different strategies just until you figure out what's important to you. And you just want to make sure, those rewards don't sabotage your efforts. I've had people come in and tell me like, oh, I did so good this week with going to the gym, and now I'm going to go buy, some pizza and, kind of completely forget about what they're doing. I'm not saying you can't enjoy those things from time to time, but if that's how you're rewarding yourself every week, that's probably not going to help you out in the long run, especially when you're first starting out with making some of these changes. Additionally, when you first start out, you might have these small rewards or just different types of rewards. So you might have to change that like reward criteria as things go on, or increase those things to shape the behavior until you reach what you're really wanting to do. Another thing here is just trying to remember, like a different way to look at it would just be like if you're anxious or stressed out and you know that exercise can help you, um, that might be kind of like a motivation or a reward for that negative behavior that you're trying to get away. Some people will even, I said reward system here, some people might even do like mild penalties or like punishments. I'm not one for this, but that that is a way, and it might be more of like a thinking like, okay, if I don't get my workout in and I am anxious right now, I know my anxiety isn't going to get any better. Like maybe that's the mild punishment or the mild penalty that you think of when it comes to that. I don't think you need to go like, oh, I didn't work out today, so I need to go twice as hard tomorrow to penalize myself. That's not what I'm saying here, but it could be more of just like a thinking exercise instead. As far as like, okay, I know if I don't go, I'm gonna feel worse mentally. I need to help out with that. So that would maybe be what I would suggest versus actually penalizing yourself. The next one is improve time management skills. So it's tough to feel motivated when you have a lot on your to-do list or you're procrastinating and you just can't get things done. So it is important to look at how we're spending our time, and prioritizing things and getting, like you feel like you're using your time effectively, with your to-do list, your priority list, and it can absolutely help with just keeping yourself accountable with like, okay, I'm going to schedule in my exercise, or I'm going to schedule in my meal prep time, or I'm going to schedule in a 1 hour time with my friends so I can get some social time in. So it kind of works two ways in that, but it's definitely important to just look at your day and how you're managing your time, and what it's doing to your mental health, or maybe you have too many things, or you're just you're not saying no to certain things, and that's where that established boundaries comes into play. Saying no or pausing before you say yes, communicating what you need very clearly, um, comes into play for work and life. So it's important to look at those two things, because not only can they help you get the behavior done that you're wanting to do, but they can also help with like any type of overwhelming obligations that you might be feeling. To just go into the communicating your needs clearly, this is something that, if you do need a half hour to go work out, who do you need to talk to get that done? Talking to those people and letting them know why it's important to you that you're doing these things. Um, and that can help. That can go back to the supportive friends and family and coworkers. I know I've had to do that myself with like trying to get to the gym. I have a really hard time doing it after work, so I've had conversations with people of like, okay, is there a time that I can do it during my lunch break? Are you okay with me taking this time to go to the gym, and just communicating those things and letting them know that this is important to you, and it helps create accountability kind of at the end of the day with all that. The next one is mindfulness and just increasing awareness. So um, when we are practicing mindfulness or just sitting in the moment and increasing awareness, it can bring clarity on what we want to change. It can help with identifying those values, those needs, our desires. Not only that, it can reduce stress and anxiety, which is going to help improve your focus, your self-efficacy. It can help cultivate a positive mindset, a feeling of gratitude, emotional balance, and it's going to move you to those intrinsically valued goals. Like in the beginning, we talked about extrinsic versus intrinsic. And a lot of times I hear people talk about extrinsic, you know, goals, motivations. So this will help you move over to that intrinsically valued goal mindset. How do we get there? Um, there are all sorts of things out there now. I listed a couple like Insight Timer, Calm, YouTube. I mean, there are so many things out there that can help you with getting to these um, types of practices. So, guided imagery or visualization techniques, positive self talk. So, gratitude journal or sentence completion prompts. So, what I mean by that is like you could write or do a practice that's like, I am hopeful or hoping for blank. I least desire blank. I'm most comfortable when, I'm most excited by, I feel most lost when, so that helps you just kind of get to an awareness, or it helps you figure out what's important to you. Um, and then there's deep breathing, box breathing, mindful walking, listening, eating, and like I said, those two down there at the bottom ones. I personally use Insight Timer. I think it's great. They have all sorts of different prompts in there. So a lot of times I will use it like if I want to do like a morning gratitude deep breathing session, I can find one that's a few minutes long. And they have some that are a lot longer than that. They have imagery and visualization stuff in there. So there's all sorts of great things with some of these apps or on YouTube or on the internet. And not only that, it's going to help, like I said, with the stress and anxiety of like your day-to-day stuff. So I highly recommend practicing mindfulness. And if it's not to increase your motivation, it's for other values and other health benefits. I highly suggest it. We're finally getting to the SMART goals. So this, when we're setting these specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound, or time-specific goals, it's going to provide the clear direction, a sense of control and accomplishment. It's going to break down those larger tasks into manageable chunks, and then, even better, tie your SMART goals into your values. And this is something, we should be talking about, like when we're coaching with you, we can most certainly set SMART goals with you. Um, we can talk about what you're wanting to achieve, because a lot of times people will come in with, like I said, a very vague idea. They kind of know what's important to them, and they'll just talk about, like, I want to exercise, or I want to eat better, I want to get better sleep. You can insert any behavior in there that you're wanting to do. But the more specific that we can get with this, the better, because it's going to provide that clear direction. It's going to really help you adhere. And then after that, when you're looking at these, you can evaluate them better. You can figure out what direction you might need to take if that SMART goal didn't work. How do we need to evaluate it and change it and make it work better for you? But goal setting is it's so important in so many different aspects, not just behavior change. So I highly encourage you to practice this in any area of your life. One of the last ones here is get support. So I mentioned this earlier on, some of the reasons why we lack motivation, but it is very important that you understand that and recognize that sometimes these tips just won't do the job, and that you may need to utilize your EAP, a mental health professional. Some of the other just smaller tips would be, prioritize those positive relationships, join a community group. We talked about the importance of accountability and just having positive support in our life. And then give support to others. That's another way to find purpose or find value, which is another way to find motivation in our lives. Then the last one here is about practicing healthy habits. So, just self care in general can be ideal for maintaining overall well being and may play a key role in overcoming a lack of motivation. So, some of these you may be trying to already do, and that's why you're trying to find motivation. Because, I mean, there are so many times in coaching too that I hear, I know what I need to do, I just need to do it. I don't have any motivation to do it, I don't want to do it. So, some of these things you may be looking at them and be like, absolutely not. Like, this is what I'm trying to find motivation for. But like I said earlier, sometimes just because you engage in one healthy activity doesn't necessarily mean that you'll engage in another one or have motivation to engage in another one. There are plenty of people I know who eat really well, but do not have the motivation to exercise regularly. So, any of these that you're looking at, like, okay, I can definitely do those things. The more you can practice those self care or those healthy habits, the better it's going to be for you, because not only that, we know that when we are taking care of our mind and our body, it just helps with the overall well-being, how we're feeling, and can reduce some of those anxiety, depression, burnout symptoms, stress symptoms. So the more, it's all very circular if you haven't figured that out already. So definitely practice healthy habits when you can. So we've gone over everything at this point. Really, the only other thing I have for you is just kind of the takeaway message, which is on the next slide here. And that's just, having compassion as you're trying to find, more motivation. Setbacks are a part of that process. Stay consistent. Don't let failure demotivate you. Learn from those mistakes, keep going. And motivation is certainly not a constant state. It fluctuates. It's going to be based on so many factors, some of them that we've gone over. So it's normal to have those periods of low motivation, but you just have to keep being persistent with it. So if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out. My email is ktam@logansportmemorial.org, or you can reach me at 574-725-2012. I'm option number 1. Thank you.